Hey, well, welcome, Raider Shirt. So glad and thankful that you joined me today. And we're here, as you know, to discuss, but so whoever's watching this in the future, we're talking about discipline and how we need to be able to do that fair, equitable, and and then with I guess you could say kindness, or at least a fairness for sure, right? We don't have to be butts about it when we're advising commanders on discipline or actually carrying out and executing that discipline. So before we get too far into this, what I'd like to do is just go around the room, so to speak, and just a quick introduction about who you are and where you're from and what you're about, kind of thing. So Master Sergeant Heights, we'll start out with you, sir.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chief. I'm Master Sergeant Heights. I'm currently the first sergeant for the 28th Force Support Squadron. I've been a diamond for almost a year now. I've been in a little bit over 19 years, so this year will be my 20th year mark. I'm originally a pavements and heavy construction equipment operator by trade. And yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Sergeant Heights. Appreciate that. So for y'all watching the video, y'all know I'm all excited there. Like, so me and Sergeant Heights share the same career field, so that's what I grew up doing as well. So thanks again, Sergeant Heights, for joining us. And you being a dirt boy has nothing to do with you being invited. So you're cool people. Sergeant Cook, over to you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Chief. Good morning, Raiders. Master Sergeant James Cook. I am the CE First Sergeant. I have been a diamond for 4 years now, and will be in the Air Force hitting my 20-year mark this summer. I am a medic by trade, and definitely glad to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Also, Sergeant Cook, appreciate you joining us, sir. Seen nothing but great things from you since I've been here on the yard in July of 2019. So glad you're able to join this discussion. I know you got a lot of great information to share, like the rest of the shirts, but just had a little more interaction with you. So thanks for joining us. Master Sergeant Claiborne, over to you, sir.
Morning, Chief. Morning, team. Master Sergeant Eric Claiborne. I'm a field systems craftsman by trade. For the last 9 months, I've been an assistant first sergeant to the 28th MXS. Just ended that last Friday, so now I go back to running a maintenance section. But I've been in for almost 19. I'll hit 19 in May, so about the same year group as the rest of these individuals, and happy to be here.
Awesome. Appreciate you joining us, Master Sergeant Claiborne. And like the rest of the shirts, you all come from diverse backgrounds. And so really excited to hear what you have to share with the team. I know you got a story that we'll kick it off with, kind of set the stage, so to speak. But thanks for joining the team, sir. Over to Senior Reyes. How you doing, ma'am?
Good morning, Chief. Good morning, everyone. Sergeant Reyes here from the amazing Aircraft Maintenance Squadron. I've been a first sergeant for 5 years. Prior to this, I was in contracting for 4 years and medical for about 10 or 11 years. Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. Appreciate you introducing yourself. Yeah, we've had a couple of interactions as well, and nothing but impressed by what you're able to do and what you do for our airmen out here. So I know you'll be taking the diamond off soon and getting back to contracting in some form or capacity. And so thanks for all you've done as a shirt. So thanks for all of you shirts and everything that you bring to the fight. A lot of times people don't fully understand, I think, in my experience, of what a shirt goes through and understanding the burden of command with the commander that you work with. And so a lot of people don't understand that as well. And the first sergeants get that same stress and that same workload. It's kind of like that diamond that you wear is kind of like sitting on the back of your vertebrae right there, creating a lot of stress and pressure. And you never show it, or a lot of times you don't show it, and you continue to take care of our airmen. So I, for one, having worked with, I've never been a first sergeant myself, but being as a squadron superintendent and just as a senior NCO growing up in the Air Force, respect the heck out of first sergeants. And I also want to take a plug real quick for you all. I really encourage our NCOs and our senior NCOs to do more NCOing and senior NCOing and not just kick everything to the first sergeant, right? Because sometimes, I'm sure y'all can attest to, and not necessarily what we'll discuss today, but people come to you asking you a question, you're just like, where's your NCO at, man? Come on. So anyway, thanks for what you do. And to get this kicked off, I asked Master Sergeant Claiborne to share a story. Like, we did a pre-huddle, if you will, just kind of talking about how we want to go through this. And the overall theme of this is talking about discipline with dignity. You want to make sure you're doing it right, doing it fair and equitable. So, I don't get too caught up on the title of it, but at the end of the day, it's not mistreating people, holding people accountable, but not mistreating them and being a butt about it when you're doing it. So Master Sergeant Claiborne had shared a story, and I've asked him to share that with us to just kind of set the stage for this discussion. And then we got some questions that I'll run the panel through. But Master Sergeant Claiborne, over to you, sir, about just kind of open us up with that story you shared and kind of set the narrative for us.
I appreciate it, Chief. So we're talking about discipline with dignity, not being a butt. So I've got a pretty unique story. It may not be unique, sadly, but a pretty extreme example. Back when I was stationed over in Germany about 15 years ago, I worked with a younger airman, and we were out working on a jet one night. It was a Friday night. We had just got done doing some ops checks. We were wrapping everything up, getting ready to go home, start the weekend. And I handed some tools to the airman. I said, hey, throw these back in the toolbox. I'm gonna go in here and finish up the paperwork. Come back out from doing the paperwork, and we're missing one of the tools that I had just handed this guy. So, I asked him, I said, hey, what happened to this tool? And he says, well, I don't know. And I said, okay, well, what do you mean you don't know? I just handed it to you. Where'd it go? And he said, well, I don't know. So we start tearing the truck apart, looking for it. We looked all up and down the aircraft ramp and started pulling up sewer grates and drain grates. And, finally went back in to check the office that I went into to do the paperwork, started flipping through the forms binder, and here was this tool. And so I walked back outside and I said, hey, did you set this tool here on this form binder? And he said, yes, sir. And I said, okay, so you knew where it was? He's like, yes, sir. I said, well, why didn't you tell me that? We've been looking for an hour. Why didn't you tell me you put it in a forms binder? And he says, because I thought that if I told you it was in there and I was wrong, that you would write me up for lying to an NCO. And the reason that he was at that point to where he thought that was the proper course of action was because he had been just hammered for everything that you could possibly be hammered for. You're late one time, bam, nail you to the wall, and this is back in 2006, 2005, 2006. So there's a lot of yelling going on, it was accepted to call someone stupid. It wasn't frowned on like it is now. And so this guy endured a lot of that, almost what I'd consider now, or we'd probably all consider now, abuse. And that all came through the form of correction or discipline. So he wasn't being picked on, as he walks through the door, but it's just one of those things where, bad luck Chuck or, bad luck Brian, and he's got a trend, bad thing comes in threes, right? It was my experience. And just every time something happens, he's just nailed to the wall with no remorse. And so we got this individual to a point where he was even scared to operate and scared to do his job. And that crippled his ability to be a valuable member of the team. So.
Now, I appreciate you opening us up with that, Sergeant Claiborne. And there's a lot of different things in that particular example, that particular story that we could definitely pull the thread on, so to speak, of things that have gone wrong. And one of the things that comes to my mind, and Shirts, I'm going to go around the room and kind of get your ideas and your feelings or perspective on this. But as you gather in your thoughts, sometimes I wonder, I was a country boy knucklehead when I came in the Air Force. And I even had a test school instructor tell me, he's like, hey, you're going to have to learn how to speak better, or you're going to get picked on when you get down. I was like, I'm going to Mississippi, where I'm from, not that I picked that base. He's like, yeah, but the Air Force is very diverse, and the people you have down there at the shop might not appreciate that, and they'll pick on you and just think you're just dumb and stupid. And you got to change the way you talk. So I had tech school instructors teaching me or telling me this, because, I did have, and every once in a while when I get comfortable, my accent comes out. And I do say things sometimes that probably don't help me a whole lot when I'm saying, I'm just a simple country boy. Help me understand this. And that's not to say that all country boys are not intelligent. I ought to be careful how I actually say that and not downplay myself as well. But so there was things, when I walked in the door, they're like, this dude, you know what I mean? So I kind of wonder, Master Sergeant Claiborne, as you discuss, I kind of wonder the attitude of this young man. Did he kind of already have a chip on his shoulder a little bit based on whatever he went through and he had gone through in his life? 18, 19, 22, whatever years it was before he came into the Air Force. He went through basic military training and tech school, that short period of time. And then all of a sudden now we're throwing all these extra responsibilities and duties at him. And those short period of time did not change anything about really how the years that he had before he came in the military. So anyway, in the diversity report, racial disparity report, it talks about that. where the people come in the Air Force and maybe from a different area of the country that handle things differently than maybe me and you would have handled it. And we're more mature. We've been in the Air Force for a while. We've understood, like you said, calling somebody stupid is unacceptable now. But we've learned that over time. Like when I came in, a similar time frame as when you came in, people said stuff like that. You know, didn't make it right, but we kind of learned as we went along. So anyway, we're expecting these young men and women that come into our Air Force to just sometimes, in some cases, just already understand understand fully what the core values mean and where we stand and what we need to get done. So they might come in with a chip on their shoulder and it makes them an easy target. Not saying that's right, but that's how a lot of people look at it. So anyway, thanks again for opening us up with that. So I'll just open it up to the floor. Hey, there's only a handful of us here, so don't worry about stepping on mics or whatever. That keeps me from being prescriptive and calling out certain people. So on this one, as Matt Sergeant Claiborne shared the story, I think what I'd like to say is the question kind of open this up. Do we have an issue in the Air Force applying discipline correctly? And if you think we have an issue, why? And just whoever's got hot mic, go ahead and talk, and then we'll just play off of each other. So just opening up the floor for discussion.
Chief Baden, Sergeant Ray is here. The purpose of discipline, it's twofold. So you're holding members accountable for unacceptable conduct or not meeting expectations, and then rehabilitating them as well to reinforce good behavior and discourage negative behavior or conduct. However, I think a lot of times when someone is going through the discipline process, the people are upset at them because they did something wrong. And rather than treat them with dignity and respect and explain to them the discipline process and why they're going through it and what is the next step, they begin to mistreat the member, be angry with them, treat them differently as they would other airmen who have not been in trouble. It doesn't happen all of the time, but I have seen it happen before. When leaders, supervisors, NCOs, senior leaders, command team decide to treat their airmen differently because they are going through the discipline process, then that decreases the likelihood of that discipline being effective.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. Anybody else got thoughts on that?
Yes, Chief. So I believe there is an issue for multiple reasons. I'll just hit on two real quick, so I'm not hugging all the time. But first off, some supervisors are afraid of confrontation, and so many may not address deviations in standards early. And so when a different supervisor tries to address those issues that's going on with the member where they're deviating from those standards, that person that's being disciplined may feel targeted because they were allowed to do whatever that infraction was for so long without any correction. And they truly do feel targeted because their supervisor has been seeing them do this for so long and they seem to be okay with it and it seems to be authorized. So why are they being picked on? The second part goes in line with what Senior Master Sergeant Reyes had said, in that some supervisors may discipline without applying filters and not treating members with dignity and respect. We're all humans, we're all adults, we all volunteered to be here. And just because someone deviates from the standards, and that could be from a variety of different things, maybe they didn't get correct feedback or the standards weren't established early and effectively, that does not take away from the fact that everyone deserves basic human decency when we correct them. Thank you.
No, thanks. That's a great points as well. Sergeant Heitch or Claiborne, I know you shared the story, Claiborne, but both of y'all can also provide comment on it as well.
No, I agree with what both Sergeant Cook and Sergeant Reyes said. A lot of times there's that inherent fear. It's like failure to establish the standard. There's the uncertainty of knowing what standards to establish. Maybe they don't necessarily, that supervisor doesn't have that development, or they're still trying to figure out their way, and sometimes that plays a role in that process. And then similarly, with regards to they have that airman, whether it's kind of what you alluded to earlier, Chief, where you may not have necessarily started out with the troop that has the paperwork, but you get that individual eventually, and it plays a part on your thought process. You're establishing an impression that you haven't physically been there to be able to establish one for yourself. You're kind of going off of what you've seen or what you've been told, and that sometimes can play play a part on how that affects your thought process and how you treat that individual at that given point in time, where, oh, it's an inconvenience, or it seemed as an inconvenience, like, man, I got this airman that keeps messing up. He came to me messed up, and it's just I'm dropping the hammer on him, because I feel like if I don't, then how am I perceived as that supervisor in that regard? So
That's a great point. Thanks, Sergeant Hodge. I'll take just a second, and Sergeant Claiborne, I'll open it up for you. I think it's a great point, because a lot of times in our culture, right, because me and you come from the same career field, and there's other cultures out there that are similar to ours, or maybe even, I would say, on a more extreme side. And not to say that our career field has a horrible culture, but when I first came in, it was like that. I was sharing with all of you guys on here earlier. Pause 1 second. I'm going to admit Sergeant Blair is joining us. And we'll let him join in on the team here. But Sergeant Blair, if you can hear me, sir, we're in the middle of a question answer scenario type thing right now. And we get into that, I'll flip it back around. You can introduce yourself to the team, and we'll go from there. But you're right, Sergeant Heights. So in our career field, I was considered the bulldog, and there's a lot of people who are like, hey, if you got a troubled airman that can't get right kind of thing, send them over to Sergeant Vaden. Sergeant Vaden will get them all squared away. And so there were times where I had to learn as a supervisor myself of like, okay, I can't just be like the macho, staff sergeant that everybody's like afraid of, that gets them in line, and either keep you in the Air Force or show you the front gate. And you're right, there's a pressure on our supervisors, and maybe Shirts, as y'all have heard him talk about that, that's something else we can circle back to and discuss later. But Sergeant Claiborne, as we move forward, I know you shared the story, but what are your thoughts on that? Applying discipline correctly. If you heard your peers chit chat here about that, what are some of your additional thoughts?
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, definitely all good points. I agree with all of them. I think a big thing here is emotional intelligence, and then trusting the process, right? So, if you trust the process, then you kind of you're removing yourself, that personal part of, what's going on from the scenario, and then the emotional intelligence part is just, having the empathy, and then listening, and then just, taking the time, the couple milliseconds that it takes to think about how the other person feels, regardless whether they're right or wrong. They're still a human being. They're still going to react to whatever you do. And so, to the point, troubled airmen, I've had a bunch of them. Unfortunately, maintenance is a heck of a career field. A lot of habitual discipline issues, but it's taking the time to, like I said, trust the process, and just explaining that process and saying, hey, here's the deal. You can go out and no one's stopping you from drinking and driving again. You're certainly physically able to go do that, but here are the repercussions. And unfortunately, that can't be tolerated in the United States Air Force. We're the most powerful military might in the world. We can't have that here. And so setting that, bottom line up front, a lot of the times, at least in recent memory, I've been a section chief for probably almost 5 years now. A lot of the time, guys will come in, or girls will come in, and they'll know, and they're taking personal responsibility up front. It doesn't have to be me telling them that they messed up. They get it. So there is I don't have to come down with the wrath of God. They get it. They understand the process. They know what the going rate for these things are, and they made an adult decision to do these things. And so it makes it a lot easier. It's similar to feedback. There's no surprises here. You get what you've earned. And so, yeah.
Those are great points as well, Claiborne. And so, Blair, we're going to kick it over to you in just a second to introduce yourself. So Shirts, the rest of Shirts and yourself included, Blair, after you get through with introducing yourself, of kind of talking about, we touched on two really big, I think, pillars to this issue in the early stages. One, treating people like humans to start with, and then outliving or growing past or maturing past, the expected norms within your culture of your career field. Right. So, you're absolutely right when somebody comes in. So I don't know if you can see in the picture behind me here, that's my son. That's not me as a young airman basic. That's my son that's in the Air Force. So he will be coming into a shop, a section, a flight, a squadron, a group, a wing, everything else, right, that is not daddy controlled. Right. And so I expect, though, that everybody else treats him with dignity and respect. Now he's a lot like me when I first came in. Now he's got a dad that's a chief that has told him like, hey, this is what you say and what you don't say and things like that. But at the same time, he's a young man, right? So he's going to have his own, I got to spread my wings. I'm going to test this and test that. I mean, that's just the way humans are. So I've told him always to understand what the responsibilities are, understand what the actual expectation and standards are. So y'all hit on that. So I'd like your thoughts on how do we do that better? If you feel like we're not doing that, because we're not, as I say, I'll tell our ALS students, right? I mean, we're not the Codlin Corporation, right? Claiborne, you touched on it. We're the defense, support and defense of the Constitution and defense of our nation, right? In our way of life. We're not about coddling people, but we are about holding people to the standard, but doing it with a human aspect, right? And that's what this conversation is about. So be thinking about that. I want to circle back to that. Master Sergeant Blair, thanks for being able to join us. I heard that you were feeling a little bit under the weather. Didn't expect you to be able to join us today, but thanks for showing up. If you can, if you feel like it, go ahead and introduce yourself to the team. We're just a little bit about who you are, your background a little bit, and then we'll kick it back around for questions.
First of all, I want to apologize for coming on late, dealing with a couple issues in the squadron. But I'm Master Sergeant Blair. I'm the 89th Attack Squadron First Sergeant. By trade, I'm Security Forces. Been a First Sergeant for about 1.5 years now. Just sucking everything in and learning. That's all I have, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining us, Sergeant Blair. No, we're all learning, and that's something I want us all as airmen to be comfortable with. They're agnostic to the grade, and agnostic to whether we were an airman that wears his uniform or one of our civilian airmen. We're all in the learning process, and the sooner we all agree and understand that, the better we'll be as leaders and as managers. That's another thing. It's not for this discussion, but people get a bad rap for being a good manager. But yeah, so we've gone around. Sergeant Blair, you kind of came in when you came in, and no apologies necessary, man. You're a first sergeant. You got a lot of things going on, and so what we've done is Sergeant Claiborne opened up the discussion for us, and we're kind of just going through now, peeling the onion or pulling the thread on that, so to speak. So as I kind of left off, I'd like your thoughts on, we're not the Codlin Corporation. How would you advise, and we'll get it stepping into the discipline process, but on the onset, young airman, we'll say young airman Baden comes to a squadron, comes to a flight, comes to an office section, whatever. What would be your advice to those frontline supervisors of like how to start off right, dealing with people from multiple different backgrounds? And Claiborne, I know you touched on it. We'll start with you and then go back around the room of kind of like, how do we start the process off right kind of thing? And like your thoughts on that.
How we start the process off right as it pertains to the discipline process overall? Well, textbook answer is, setting the standard, right? And setting your expectations. But as far as, the way I've done it and the way I'd like it, I wish it was done. My personal preference is having a conversation, right? Devoid of emotion, and gathering facts and listening to an individual. And kind of just having that hopefully built up relationship prior to having to have that discussion, to where where this individual's from, what their mannerisms are, their personal struggles or their goals. And I think it's again it's a culture thing, and I think we're really starting to overuse the word culture, and I think it's just by proxy of the change that's needed, because culture is extremely important. It's the foundation. We are saying it a lot, but the culture, you need to be in a position that you're trusted, and you need to be in a position where you're familiar with the individual to some degree, whether that's calling their supervisor in, if you're the shirt, then, have that discussion with the supervisor to figure out where this individual's at in life, where they're at in their career. And then having that baseline, and then going forward, and then just having a discussion. Because at the end of the day, like you said, we're all learning. This is all still kind of an experiment, right? There was never a Air Force where it could not be more perfect. We can always be more perfect. And so looking at people as teammates and trying to help them build and all of us grow together kind of steers that conversation to where you're having a conversation. Okay, we've got a problem. How do we fix this? How do I help you fix this? Because here's the problem that your problem is presenting the Air Force, right? And we want to be better than that. We got to be better than that. So that's where I'd begin.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. I know young Airman Basic Vaden, when he got there, he would appreciate someone sitting him down. And because I'll be honest, as we kick it around to the rest of the room, I've asked him questions like this, right? I've had Zoom calls with him and a couple of his friends. They're already like, hey, Chief, what do I need to be working on? I was like, you need to know your job first, right? Focus on that. Don't worry about blow the zone right now. Forget all that stuff. But, I've asked my son, just like on one-on-one conversations, I'm like, hey, bro, tell me about standards of conduct. Like, tell me 1-1. What do you know about that, man? What did they teach you in basic? He's like my little mole, right? So I'm like, what did they teach you in basic? And I will tell you, he's a security forces. He's going to be a defender. And they're doing it right in their tech school based on what he's telling me. And I know he's probably leaving some stuff out, but they're doing it right. They're instructors. I give them props, not disrespectful, but we'll get quote unquote in their face, close proximity to them and let them know like, hey, when you're messing up, when you're slipping the standard, and they're really good. I think that whole career field is really good about maintaining the standard, right? Setting the standard and maintaining the standard. But no, thanks for opening that up. I know the young man behind me, he would appreciate that as well. So just to the rest of the room, some thoughts and maybe amplifying thoughts on what Sergeant Claiborne had shared or what your perspective is on it. Of like when our airmen get to the unit, what's that baseline? How do we start them out right? And what's your advice on that?
Chief Vaden, Sergeant Ray is here. I believe that for a first line supervisor, where it begins for them is even before the member arrives to the unit. If you have a member on the gains roster and you know that you are going to be their supervisor when they arrive, you should be reaching out before they get there. The first interaction, the earliest interaction that you can probably have with that member will set the tone for what kind of relationship you're going to have with airmen that we are trying to onboard and integrate into the squadron.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anyone else?
Chief, yes. So I'd say we all come with different values. Cultures are completely different across the world. You're talking about low context versus high context cultures. And when we're talking about relationships and even time is like one of those biggest things. When we're reviewing our stats internally here in CE, one of the things that we've noticed is the biggest reason airmen get disciplined or for coming to work late. And for some cultures out there, they're not necessarily as in a hurry and time isn't that big. And even when you see it in a personal nature, there's certain individuals from certain cultures that will historically come late, right? The party doesn't start till we get there, but they're not necessarily in a hurry to get there. Time all has different values to different cultures. We need to understand what airmen's values are when they come, and then get them to understand what the organization's value is, especially in regards to time, or those different standards that we have that may differ from their own personal values. It's a mentorship opportunity. And for us in CE, what we've been preaching to our supervisors here with that onboarding process, the first 6 months in airman is brand new here to the unit and to the Air Force. It's not an opportunity to discipline. It's an opportunity to understand the member, get them to understand the organization's values, and mentor them through that process. We should not be issuing discipline to a member the first 6 months unless it's really blatant and egregious. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Chief, I would like to say I will echo everything Senior Reyes and Sergeant Cook just said, but I think the bottom line is treating people how to be human to other people, and ask questions. So one of the things I do, I sit them down, I go, what's one thing that concerns you, about being in the military? And I get some random answers. Like the other day, someone goes, I'm concerned about doing my taxes. And I really thought about it. I was like, this is the first time this person is doing their taxes. So yeah, they would be concerned about it. So I think just sitting down and asking questions to see where they are in life and what experiences they have had versus what experience, you have had to try to match up and help them. So I just try to be a good human, treat people well. And 9 times out of 10, people are going to mess up. But if you tell them the standards and the consequences, normally it doesn't happen as much. But that's my thing, treat people well.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Anybody else?
I'd like to echo in that time piece, but on a different scale. It's just time is important. It's something that we don't always have the luxury of having a lot of. So whenever we do have that opportunity, taking and using it to the utmost, and similar to what the other shirts have said, just asking those questions and getting to know the individual personally on that personal level. What is their background? Why did you, I know when they've come in and seen me during that initial in processing, I'm asking a lot of those questions. It's, tell me about home, tell me why you joined, tell me about your family, tell me about your siblings, and it's all different reasons: school, travel, wanted to serve, military background, and those answers create even more questions. So it's all about taking that time to really dive in and understand what makes this individual who they are, and similar to what Sergeant Cook said, what their beliefs are and what their culture is, and understanding that, because it gives you so much more insight into what they're going through, what they could be going through, what they could potentially be facing, and it just goes a long way. So time is important when it comes to onboarding and just understanding the individual, even when it comes to that point where you have to sit down and deliver that discipline. Thanks.
All great points. I really appreciate y'all sharing that. And so you hit on a couple of things that I kind of want to summarize real quick in this particular vein of our conversation. Frontline supervisors, I love what Senior Reyes said. Hey, like it truly does start when you reach out as a sponsor or as a supervisor. Maybe the supervisor is a sponsor. I know that doesn't happen in every case. They really start setting the tone. I tell squadron superintendents that I talk to and mentor now, and squadron commanders, the first 10 minutes in the unit can really set that entire tour for that airman, right? Of what they see and what they're exposed to. I've heard some crazy stories, right? Of people in the first day within the unit got involved in parties and all kind of just other stuff going on, and that was like, they were like, whoa, what is this? And end up in trouble. And in some cases that set the tone, a lot of cases set the tone for their entire tour. Sometimes their entire tone for the Air Force. So your first 10 minutes, I say when that airman, that first interaction with that airman basic, airman first class, whatever rank it is that is coming in from a technical school to your base, vitally important. So I want our supervisors that are listening to this, or any senior NCOs that are listening to this, that share it with their teams, to really emphasize that point of, like Senior Reyes said about that onboarding. And then all of y'all have shared, set and establish those standards up front. Sergeant Cook, I love the way y'all look at it of saying, hey, if it's within the first 6 months, then it better be egregious if I'm getting some discipline stuff done on airmen. I know not every career field's the same. I'll use an example, use my son as an example again. He falls asleep on post with his M4, done, right? He knows that. That's the one thing they ingrain. Like, you cannot leave tech school not understanding that. Now, you might get to a base and say, I never know. That's not true. My son has approved that to me, that, Dad, you will know. Because I've asked him a question. I was like, do they beat that in your head? Oh, yes, Dad, they let us know. So I get it. Sometimes, and like one of you said, I'm sorry, I don't remember which one said, sometimes, people going to do what a person, I think it was you, Claiborne, said, hey, I can't control you. And I don't want to control you. I want you to be a good airman on your own. I can't control whether you go out there and fall asleep on post with an M4. I can't. I can hold you accountable once you do that, and I can remind you. So setting those standards early and often, right? And then giving grace. What I heard all of y'all saying was provide a little bit of grace where we can. There are some things that are legal and illegal. No grace can really be given, and it's not our jurisdiction to give that grace, right? But something else I really want to pull the thread on just a little bit. Sergeant Claiborne, you brought it up, and you talked about hammering. Excuse me. Talked about, hey, Airman Baden did, let's use me as an example. I fell asleep on post with my M4. I knew that was going to get me non-judicial punishment. I know when I woke up or when you woke me up, it's over. No excuses, nothing, it's done. And then somebody just kind of beat me with a hammer. And I'm not saying security forces does this, but I'm just using that as an example of like yelling at me, calling me stupid, whatever. Like, that doesn't do anything for the process. I already knew. So I'd like, and it kind of ties into the next, it does tie into the next question of, do we do this fairly, right? Because I know y'all have all seen at some point in time, it doesn't have to be the exact example I used, where, kind of like you said, Claiborne, where you opened us up, that young man, in this case, it was the young man you told the story about, just kind of felt like he just kept getting hammered. And then there was probably some other people had done very similar things that didn't get hammered. So I'd like your thoughts on, do we apply discipline, the heart of this conversation, equally and equitably, I guess you could say, fairly across the force, across the Air Force? And a lot of this was brought up in the racial disparity report. Kind of what are your thoughts on, is it tied to that in your experiences? Is it tied to that extra hammering or the instant hammering of like, hey, you were late for work and you're automatically getting paperwork within your first 2 days of being there? versus somebody else that's a different color, a different ethnicity, or different religious preference or whatever, that doesn't have that happen. So overall question would be, do we apply the discipline fairly and equitably across the force, and in using the hammering, if you will, as an example of getting after, yes, I see this happen in this demographic, and I don't see it happen over here. Sergeant Cook, I'd like to open this up with you, sir. I know you said that you have a tracking mechanism, and I know the Air Force and Senior Reyes, I'd like to start this next portion off with you. So be thinking about that, of the Air Force saying, hey, we are going to track X, Y, and Z, and we'll get into that. But Sergeant Cook, for this particular question, I'd like to start it off with you, and then we'll go around the room just as we've done on everything else. Are we doing it right in the Air Force, and what are some of the best practices that you're implementing there in CE?
Copy. Thank you, Chief. So over this last year, my command team really took the opportunity to get after this way ahead of the Air Force. And for this whole last year, we reviewed every single document that came through LOCs, LOR, any kind of admin action. And we've developed our own tracker that we've been looking at for this whole last year. And looking at different demographics such as race, ethnicity, but also shops, AFSCs, time on station, time on grade, which ranks we're getting disciplined, and then taking a look and seeing the allegations, and then is there any disparity between what the allegation was and what the members received. And as I had mentioned earlier, we peeled that whole onion back, and we found that by far, airmen in the grades of E1 through E4 were getting the most discipline. The number one reason, and that's 9 occurrences for this last year of 2020, were for being late to work. The runner-up is we had 8 occurrences of individuals getting in trouble for breaking ROM or general order restrictions, which typically that's not an environment that we're operating under. And so that's where we're kind of trying to get after the onboarding process and teaching our supervisors to understand their airmen and the values they bring, and kind of align those values with the organization's values, what the importance is. And so that's where we got into that. The second part that I'd like to touch on real quick is, I don't think as Air Force, we do a great job teaching supervisors how to discipline. We do teach them when they're supposed to discipline and what those standards are and how to give the feedback and stuff, but we don't go through the process of teaching someone how to actually administer discipline to somebody else. And so we end up disciplining the way that we were disciplined as airmen ourselves. And so many of us being brought up by maybe some old school supervisors and leaders, we were yelled at. And so now when we go to discipline someone, we don't know anything other than yelling at them. And so I think this is an opportunity for us at this point in juncture to really do some self-reflection and to take that step forward to show our supervisors how they should discipline.
I appreciate that, Sergeant Cook. So you highlighted on a couple of things there. I love how our first sergeants, our command teams can, and like I said before in the opening of this, before we actually started recording, and the rest of the team won't get to hear our chit chat behind the scenes, but I think a lot of squadrons were already doing some level of this, right? So good on you and your team. And I know you're not the only one, but you're sharing with us what you're doing. So I want to congratulate you on being forward thinking and starting to look after, and not just pigeonholing, so to speak, the statistics, but trying to understand all the other factors playing into that. So vitally important, because as a lot of our career fields, are functional areas, CE, you got 12 AFSCs, different AFSCs, all have different cultures in themselves. And some, like security forces, as an example, you have one with a couple of shred outs, but you have one AFSC. Not that there's not different shops and sections that have different cultures, so to speak. And Claiborne, I know I'm using the word culture like 27,000 times in this discussion, but I do hear you, man. It's like resilience. We overuse that word too, and people are like, oh my gosh, there ain't no resilience. Why do we keep saying it? But there really is resilience. But anyway, so I understand and I can appreciate you trying to figure out those other factors. So anybody else on this, on the same question here, whether you have something you're doing in your unit now, or just your thoughts and perspective on, hey, as an Air Force, I don't think we're not all at the level Sergeant Cook's at and his team, but we're not even, maybe we are applying discipline incorrectly or not fair and equitably across demographics. Thoughts on that?
Chief Sergeant Reyes here. At the Amazing Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, I believe we are doing an amazing job at executing fair and equitable discipline across the board. And there are a few things that we have in place to do that. Nothing as high level as Sergeant Cook and his team. However, we strive to reach that level of excellence. But one of the things that we do at the command level, if a member is facing disciplinary action, we take into account a lot of different factors. We look at the member's duty performance. We get feedback from the entire leadership chain and from the leaders who deal with that member on a daily basis. We review the contents of the personal information file. We review the history of conduct, as well as we get feedback from Bomb Wing JA on the disciplinary trends across the installation for the same situation that the member is facing. If the decision is made to present the member with command level discipline, we also ensure that the member understands all their resources available during the discipline process. We also ensure that the member understands every single step of what is going on, whether the member is getting an LOR, UIF, or being offered NJP. The shirt sits down with the member and their leadership team and explains every single word on whatever paperwork is given to them, and spends a lot of time establishing the credibility and the integrity of the process in an effort to make it effective and to make it fair and equitable.
Thank you, Senior. Appreciate it. So also moving forward here, I got it. Like, so if you want to remain agnostic, right, you can be like, I know a friend, right? But seriously, you don't have to necessarily talk about your unit here. I do trust that our squadrons, our command teams out here in Raider country are doing the very best they can. But maybe you have some examples, or maybe you don't. I'm not trying to put words into your mouth at all. But anybody else on the call here that maybe sees things a little bit differently, or sees where we're missing the mark a little bit? All right.
Chief.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think as an institution, right, as the Air Force, as the system is structured, I think it's fair and equitable. Certainly, right. The humans are the variable, and so I can say what I've witnessed in my unit, and obviously there's bias there because I'm in my unit, right, or there's at least perceived bias. But from what I can say is, I think we're doing it correctly. And that's looking at it just like Senior Reyes was saying, as looking at the individual, looking at the past. Now, having said that, and then also here comes some more perceived bias, but being, African-American and being in for 19 years, have I witnessed things that applied to some and not others? Sure, right? And that goes not just based on, race or ethnicity. That goes on, how fast of a mechanic are you, right? Or how much do you volunteer, right? There's things that we do, and we know because we say we want to present a professional military image, right? So that alone is presenting yourself in the best light. And so that matters because we know that light matters. And so we know that perception matters. And perception's a tricky thing because perception's left up to the person perceiving it. And so, I want to say that, yes, there definitely, and this applies to, if someone thinks someone looks goofy, right? And then the other guy looks like, Justin Timberlake or something, there's going to be a difference in interaction there. That's human nature, period. And that all changes according to someone's personal preference of what they think, professional looks like, or what they think trustworthy looks like, or what they think honest looks like. All those things matter. And so I know that gets applied differently, and that's a human factor. And so I just want to put that out there.
No, I appreciate that's speaking the truth, Sergeant Claiborne. I say dropping the mic on wisdom there. But before I kind of add some commentary to that, Sergeant Blair or Sergeant Heitch, anything to add? I don't feel like you have to, but if you have something you want to add, feel free to jump on and share. I don't see any movement toward the microphone, so I guess we're calm, silent, which is fine. That's fine. A couple of things you mentioned there about human nature. I'll use this as an example. So anybody listening to this, just apply it to me, and then look at or the story or example I'm giving you, a scenario, if you will, and then apply it to whatever rank. Doesn't even matter. So as a Chief Master Sergeant, my job is, and my duty, my calling, my responsibility is to be the example. There are going to be times as a human I fail, right? And I got that, and I understand that. I'm not looking to be a free pass. Times I will screw things up. I will say the wrong thing at the wrong time, or not interject at the right time, or whatever. However, there are laws, there's rules, there's regulations. So as a Chief Master Sergeant at 20 years, if I mess up in that regard, right, there's a difference between mistakes and you know, something illegal activity or something that's unbecoming of the rank that I wear, or unbecoming of any rank. So you just see it in the news. That's why I'm using Chief Master Sergeants. I'm not going to call names, but you'll see it in the news. Had a unprofessional relationship with an exec, or unprofessional relationship with anybody, or making rude comments or crude comments. And then you will hear on the other side of that, well, they served X amount of years, let's say 20 plus years. We'll say if I was in that situation, I've served my country 20 years. I've done 9 deployments. I've done all this other stuff, as compared to the staff sergeant that hasn't had the experience or the opportunity to do all that kind of stuff yet. And we hammer the staff sergeant, and we just let Chief Vaden just kind of slide off, and maybe not fire or make him retire, but just goes to a staff position or somewhere where he can't affect airmen. And I'm not making light of what the Air Force, how they process things, because Claiborne is, to your point, it's where the human factor comes back in. And that's what I want us to get after at the most tactical level in our units, because we all know that's a heartbeat. That's where the problems start, stop, or get fed and fueled. So you're absolutely right. Using that as an example, somebody might be like, oh, Chief has done so much, let's just let him slide. That should never happen. I will tell everybody that's watching this right now, first off, that will never happen. Secondly, if it does, for some reason I lose my mind, then I'm going to be the first to be like, hey, it's time for me to go. I can't stand in front of people after I've done something like that. So where I'm saying, as I agree with you, Claiborne, there's differences in how people apply things based on different things, right? It's not always race or ethnicity. Sometimes it's like you said, who's the best mechanic? Who's the best dirt boy? Who's the best whatever? We'll let them slide. Yeah, that's just how Caleb is. He's a little rough and uses the F word a lot, but he's a good operator. That's got to stop, right? That's what I want our supervisors to understand. That has to stop. It's not, I might think someone is more attractive than the other person and give them leeway. That has to stop. That is not professional. That doesn't make us a more elite fighting force. So anyway, having said that, I know Senior Reyes, I said that I wanted to talk to you or get your opinion on this. The reason I was asking you all those very pointed questions, it wasn't trying to catch you in any certain type of way, but the racial disparity report that came out did say X, Y, and Z. It did say that African-American males in this demographic this age range and this grade, I don't quote me on it. I did read the whole thing and put it on recording, but I think it was like 18 to 24, I think maybe it was, or maybe 25 in the E1 to E4 category. African-American males received more discipline. Now, to be fair, the racial disparity report did not, and it acknowledges it did not look at other ethnicities. It just compared African-Americans and Caucasians, essentially. So I'm not saying the other ethnicities out there, if you're watching this and say, hey, what about my ethnicity? I didn't do the racial disparity report. I'm just saying what it was in there, that African-American males were prosecuted, I believe the term was used, definitely disciplined at a higher rate, demographically speaking, of the percentage of African-Americans in the Air Force as compared to Caucasian males in that same age range. So anyway, that's why I brought it up. That's why I wanted to discuss it. I'm thankful that I have first sergeants, that we as airmen have first sergeants and command teams like y'all are part of, that said, hey, got it, Chief. I'm not saying that's not happening. Claiborne, you said, I've seen some things happen. I'm just saying where I'm standing right now, we're looking at all these other factors. That's great. That's awesome. But big Air Force can't just take my word for it and your word for it, right, Claiborne? They look at statistics. And I know somebody might be watching this, and I'm not a mathematician, but I know statistics can be all types of different things and different factors that play into them. However, regardless of all that, Air Force is coming out with, it's in the infant stages. I think that's probably the best way to describe it, of saying, hey, we're going to track. So if you're watching this right now, so Claiborne says, Master Sergeant Claiborne is going to write a LOR on Staff Sergeant Vaden. And so there's going to be certain requirements that are also have to be included with that, i.e. age, gender, ethnicity, things of that nature. Now, I'm going to kick it over to Senior Reyes. I know you're ready to talk on this, but I don't have all the bits and pieces, if you will, that are going to be accounted for. But Big Air Force said, hey, I looked at this racial disparity report. I'm speculating. I don't know exactly what the conversation was, but I take it as like General Brown's like, hey, we're going to do something about this. And now we're going to start collecting on this through the SGA channel. So having said that, Senior Reyes, kind of what are your thoughts on it? I know as a first sergeant, y'all got a little better read on it than when I've seen one email on it. But I want your point, your take on it. And then I kind of want to talk about potential pitfalls that we might see. That is your advice to the force, not just here at Raider Country, but to the force of things that, hey, this might be a pitfall. This is how I would suggest you get after it. So Senior Reyes, over to you.
Yes, sir. So Chief Vaden, members of the panel, what Chief Vaden is specifically talking about is the update to AFI 362907 dated 15 January 2021. And in that update, there is a new requirement, a reporting requirement. So members who are issuing an admin action must submit that finalized admin action to their immediate commander for review within 3 days of that admin action being finalized. So that is whether it's an LOC, LOA, LOR, whether it comes from the first line supervisor, from a flight chief, any admin action within 3 days of becoming a finalized records has to be provided to the commander for review. In addition to providing the finalized record of that admin action to the commander, the following data, demographic data, has to be recorded and provided to the commander as well. Rank, age, gender, race, and ethnicity of both the issuer and the recipient as listed in their official Air Force record. So whatever the race, gender, age, and ethnicity that is recorded on their CERF, that is what needs to be reported to the commander for both the issuer of the admin action and the recipient of the admin action. Then once that is all documented, that is provided to the local judge advocate office for tracking as well. One of the pitfalls that I see with this, because I've already had a discussion with my senior leaders in the unit, is they believe that the first line supervisors will be hesitant then to give paperwork because they think then that their credibility is being questioned if they have to report for an LOC, if they have to report these demographics. So my senior leaders, from the feedback they're getting out talking with the NCOs, they think that the NCOs are going to be more hesitant, thinking that everything that they're doing is, as far as administrative action, disciplinary action, will be reviewed by the command team. A positive side of this, I think, it brings transparency, a more detailed transparency to the disciplinary processes and trends in the unit. With a product like this, you can send it out to everyone in the unit without the person's name on it, along with the bomb wing newsletter that Judge Advocates sends out every month to show the people in your unit, hey, this is what's going on in our squadron, and this is what is going on across the bomb wing. So I can see a positive to this new requirement, as well as a negative to this new requirement.
Thank you, Senior. And before any of the other shirts jump on here, I'd like your thoughts, because you did bring up a pitfall, a potential pitfall. What's your advice? And then other shirts on here as well. I'd like, same thing. If you find a pitfall, give some advice on how to overcome that. If you've got them. If you don't have them, you hadn't had time to formulate. I know it's all brand new. If you hadn't had time to formulate an opinion, I don't want you just firing off blank rounds. So yeah. So Senior Reyes, do you have some advice on what would your advice be to that NCO? If an NCO came to you and said, hey, Senior, I'm not going to do any discipline anymore because I don't know how you're going to use this data, and I just feel like you're not trusting me. What's your advice back to that NCO, or whatever level? It doesn't have to be necessarily an NCO.
My advice is feel the power of your stripes and fulfill your duty, regardless of what you think people are going to think of you. If your heart is pure and you're treating people correctly and treating people equally, you don't have to ever worry if someone wants to go to EO or IG, or someone might think you're racist, or if someone might think you're targeting people. If you are doing the right thing, you don't have to worry about that.
That good point. And so opening it up to the floor real quick, what I have found, Humans, we deal with humans, right? We're in the human business. We've all talked about that. Everybody's got a feeling, and we cannot tell people how to feel because I can't control your feeling. I can only control what you're basing your feelings off of, right? The actions or policies or procedures, right? That's the only thing I can affect. I can't affect your feeling or tell you how to feel. So I'll never try to do that. But what I have found when it comes to enlisted force distribution, real quick as an example, when I had people, when I was at the squadron, we were always large squadrons in CE, we're doing our own force distribution. When you had to put down notes of why you truly said this person is a promote now, or you're recommending to the boss commander, this is a promote now or must promote, versus what you say in a room. Like if you know, like if I'm talking about Cook and I'm going to write down why Cook is not ready to be a senior master sergeant, I'll change the tone. Most humans would change the tone if I know I'm giving that feedback to Sergeant Cook. If Sergeant Cook's not in the room and he may or may not ever hear it, I'll be like, well, Sergeant Cook is a blah, 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 blah. And that's why he should not ready to be a senior master sergeant. It's all based on emotion. I know, Claiborne, you talked about removing emotion, all that separates. So Senior Ray has a great point. I also like to tell airmen in whatever grade they're in, think about the responsibility of the stripe, what we're entrusted to do by the nation, by our airmen, of what we're entrusted to do with that stripe. So yeah, opening up the floor for anyone else with thoughts on potential pitfalls and your advice to that pitfall.
Chief, Sergeant Cook here. So this is one of the reasons that we went ahead and released all the stats to our unit. We wanted to do that through a commander's call where we can get in more detail and do a Q&A session. But to get ahead of this, we released the stats and we said, hey, this is something that our unit has been doing all along. And you've seen absolutely no hindrance to anything that we've doing as far as changes to processes, to promotion recommendations or strats or anything of that nature. And so we've not treated any of our supervisors any differently after starting to collect this data. The second thing is that we told all of our leaders, this new process does not change the way that we teach, coach, mentor, or lead airmen. If it does, then you're not being an ethical leader, and you'll need to take a look at your own self, see what you need to change. Thank you.
That's awesome advice. All of y'all put that coaching thing in your head. I want to come back to that. I want to circle back. I think our new press secretary says that a lot. I'm going to circle back to that one. Don't let me forget it because I'm not as good as she is. I'll forget stuff. But anybody else, any other thoughts on this?
Chief Aiden, I have an example of a situation that we went through recently. We had this member who was served charges because he, during a random urinalysis, he popped positive for the use of coke. When he was offered those charges for illegal substance abuse, obviously he took it really bad. So we sat in the conference room with him and he was crying, trying to hold it in, apologizing. And we made it very clear that we had time because we had the paperwork in front of him and everything. We, in our little red envelopes in our folders, we pushed the folders to the side and we said, it's okay. We have time. We're here for you. And this is a member who popped positive for coke. And we let him cry. We let him process everything that happened. We spoke with him. We took about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes to just be there for him and treat him the way we would want to be treated if we were going through one of the most difficult times of our life. And once he was ready, then we continued with, hey, this is the paperwork. We're going to go through every single word for you. We're going to explain everything at any moment during the process. If you have any questions, your entire leadership team is here for you. His direct leadership team was sitting in the room with him as we're explaining the process to him. Very recently, he was found not guilty. So it made it so easy to integrate him back into the unit and into his duty section because we all chose to continue to treat him with dignity and respect, not make slide comments, not remind him of his upcoming court martial, just be there for him, be good human beings, and treat him the right way. His family was so grateful for the way that we treated him and for our support, and they thanked us profusely for helping him get through that point. I say that to say this, a lot of airmen, they don't have it that way. The moment that they get in trouble, they're being judged by everybody around them. Their business is out there and they're outcasted and they're not treated like airmen, much less human beings. So when it comes to discipline and we talk about disparity, we need to remember that at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we deserve to be treated as such. Specifically, we are all airmen until we are not. And we can't lose focus of that, regardless of what disciplinary action is going on, regardless of what situation. And I think sometimes people lose focus on what is important, and that is treating each other the right way, regardless of the situation.
Outstanding points there. I'd love to hear anybody else that has something to offer on this topic.
I think that was excellent what Senior Reyes said. And I think there's a clear delineation to be seen there between being there for an individual right after the discipline or during the discipline, and then being the person that bumps actions against regulations and saying, is that an infraction? Yeah, that's an infraction. Now my job is to uphold regulation. And then go down that route, right? Because when we think about discipline, and I know for sure a lot of the younger NCOs, the way they think about discipline is that illegal or is that not, right? And so does this person need to be corrected? And that's where discipline ends for them and their thought process. And so bringing more again of that human aspect, like the story that Senior Reyes just gave us, I think that needs to be more emphasized with our younger NCOs for the exact reason that she gave, keeping them on our team and a productive teammate.
Absolutely. Anybody else? I do have a couple more questions, and then what we'll do is we'll go with one more question, and then around the room to kind of final parting thoughts, advice, and perspective on things from each one of you shirts. But anybody else before I go to the next question? Anything else to add on this? I don't see anyone reaching for microphone. So yeah, absolutely. One point I would like to make on that, Senior Reyes, thanks for sharing that story, because you're right. I've seen it. I think all of us have seen it, where that young airman Vaden makes a mistake. And in this case, it appeared to be an illegal thing until other stuff transpired. No need to get into the details of that. But and then just a person is treated like an outcast the whole time. And then sometimes even that person did do something illegal or something that has removed them from the Air Force, and they get treated like dirt. You know, you're still a human being. Like, we all have bad days sometimes, and we all do some things that aren't right, you know, and we all have the opportunity to fail, right? And to do some things that are, you know, that are bad, right? But it doesn't mean that that's not a person we need to take care of. And I've seen it multiple times where a lot of times, and I had somebody tell me this story, and real quick, they were saying that, so the command team, the triad, this airman had walked in to get some discipline, some corrective action. I think it was like an LOC or something from the commander. Don't remember the exact level of paperwork. And when they were walking out, they heard the team laughing. Now, they could have laughed about something completely different from what the situation was, but that airman, you know, internalizes they're laughing about me or laughing about my situation. That command team was out of touch. Regardless of whatever they were laughing about, they were out of touch. You know, like, you can't keep your mouth shut for 5 seconds if somebody leaves the room. Even if you're going to laugh about the football game last night or whatever it is, that tells me you're not locked into trying to, like Senior Reyes said, about making sure this individual is good to go. I know I've been on the advice end, if you will, for 2 separations in the United States Air Force. Broke my heart. Really, it did. I know people might look at me like, Chief, you weak. I'm telling you, like, that is difficult to advise the commander. Like, yeah, they didn't pass all 7 questions. There's a lot of things that happen. This young man sat in our office and talked about, you can't send me back to where I'm from. I was never supposed to go back. And that breaks your heart. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, you made a mistake. Like, and so same thing Senior Reyes said, we treated that person. I even networked with him and I won't say the FSC because I give him maybe too much away, but I networked with him to help him do something very similar to what he did in the Air Force and civilian capacity. So you got to take care of people, because at the end of the day, we're human. So, Master Sergeant Blair, I'd like to start this one out with you. Some of the other shirts have touched on this, and some of it was before your time joining us, but ALS is at the capacity that it's at. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that PME is exactly where it needs to be, but we're going to make the best of it, take the most we can from it, and then continue to make it better. but our staff sergeants, staff sergeant selects, and some just senior airmen that go through ALS does not prepare them to supervise. So what would be your advice to those frontline supervisors and even the senior NCOs? When I talked about coaching, what is your perspective on how much coaching do senior NCOs really do for that NCO that just came out of ALS thinking that ALS has set them up, they're ready to do rock and roll? So I guess it's a kind of a multifaceted kind of question. Coaching, do you see senior NCOs coaching like they should be in your experience? Doesn't have to be unit specific. And your advice to those NCOs coming out that aren't getting that coaching, if they're not, what would your advice be to them not relying only on ALS?
Oh, perfect question, Chief. I just spoke with ALS yesterday, so that was part of my questioning that I had for them. A lot of them felt, I don't know who said it, was like some people feel like leadership targets certain people to do things in the unit. So they said those people that were targeted to, to be in more of the leadership roles and things like that, they got the coaching and all that stuff like that. So they were pretty well prepared to lead. But the other folks that were just regular senior airmen that didn't get the leadership, that wasn't in the leadership graces, they so called it, they were kind of left behind. And those were the questions that I got, like, hey, how do you deal with these situations? How do you deal with that? And I'm like, everything is different. Every situation is different. But I think, I really think it starts at that frontline supervisor level, giving people responsibility, even if they want it or not, giving them opportunities to lead. Because even though the system is set up to, if you just sit back and you watch, you'll learn something. Some people, they're out on the flight line where they don't get a chance to see it, or they're out on post security forces where they don't get to see it. I think leaders need to taking that a little better. And hey, this is how you show someone how to look for assignments on AMS. This is how you look for assignments overseas. Like, I think a lot of our airmen are missing just those little touches. Like, we're so caught up in them being, proficient at their job that the little things, the personal aspect is being left behind.
That was a great point, Sergeant Blair. Yeah, there's so many times, like, I'd go and visit as a squadron superintendent, I'd go visit a section, and I'm like, oh, Chief, I've been here for 8 years, whatever it is, and I'm like, what? Why? Do you want to be here? I mean, it's different if you want to be here. And they're like, I don't know how to leave. I'm like, shut up, and I catch myself, okay, well, don't say that to them. I'm like, well, do you know how to use my PERS? I'm like, what is my PERS? I'm like, all right, let's go to the computer. You're absolutely right, Sergeant Blair. It does start at the most tactical level of supervision and leadership of just helping people, right? So thank you for providing that. Anybody else on this topic before we go around the room for kind of final comment? Because I know I don't want to take too much of y'all's time.
Chief, one more. So I'll say during the First Sergeant Academy, and I don't know if it's changed through the new curriculum update or not, but when I went through, we did do a mediation course there, and we went through some sort of practice scenarios for how to counsel individuals on different topics that may come up to help coach us through on when we get back into, we actually put the diamond on and we face those scenarios so we can have that great demeanor and talk to individuals with dignity and respect. That's something I'd like to see expanded to the other academies out there, because I haven't seen that in NCOA or senior NCOA or ALS, and that'd be a great thing to do. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think we do enough teaching how to actually go through that moment of counseling someone. And there's also many other courses outside of the military that have applicable skills that would be very beneficial for supervisors, such as inclusive leadership and soft skills, because those are great skills to have when you're interacting with someone, with the thought process of trying to, coach them up through dignity and respect. Thank you.
Great point, Sergeant Cook. Yeah, I absolutely fully support. I'm not just in our academies. I think it should become more of our upgrade training plans, right, for every AFSC. Because if you have to make it mandatory, to be honest with you, otherwise you got a carrot and a stick kind of situation. And sure, we can get some people in the room because they think it's going to help them make whatever the next rank is. And so we can get some of those people that are motivated that way. We can still get them good training and help the Air Force. However, I'd like to make it mandatory, right? Because only way, and I know Claiborne, I'm about to hit it again, that C word, any way to affect culture, you got to make some things mandatory. And then some people come around and then some people go look at the door. And that's fine. If you're a senior leader and you're in that position, you can't adjust fire to the better way or to a better way or the way the Air Force is going, then it's time for you to step away because you're only going to get in the way. So yeah, I know Sergeant Heights, I saw your mic come on. What do you have to add, sir?
I was just going to speak to some similar situations like that. I know I'm remembering back when I was an NCO, when I was stationed back at Guam, and just having conversations with other NCOs with regards to individuals that we had in our flights, and certain members would make comments about, well, I'm not going to go to that flight because that individual is there and they don't know what they're doing. They're not even, they can't grasp a simple concept. And I'm putting that in, I guess, as polite a term as I can. But just having that conversation, I asked those questions. I'm like, so you're telling me that just because this individual is underdeveloped, or as you put it, not up to snuff as far as the career field goes, you're not even going to attempt to give them the opportunity to be developed. You're going to push them to the side. And it just blew my mind to think that it was like, you're not even willing to see what your potential can be as far as leading that individual. You just already chalked it up that, well, because this individual who they are, you're like, they're not the in crowd. They're not, I don't know. It was crazy to think. And I asked that question, like, so you're going to tell me you can sit there and walk up to this person right now and tell them exactly what you're telling me right now? Because like I said, they didn't put it in the most politest of terms. It's like, you're not going to be able to do that. So that's, again, I allude back to kind of what Sergeant Cook was talking about that self-reflection. If you know that you don't have it in you to give these individuals the opportunity, then maybe you're not fit to wear that uniform. So yeah, that's what I had to add.
Great points, man. There's so many times we see that in all different facets of our Air Force where I think Claiborne had talked about it spoke on it earlier. You know, it's just you're at the senior airman level, you're a staff sergeant, you're a technical sergeant or master sergeant. They should know better. Well, just because they should doesn't mean that they had the same opportunities you had coming up through the ranks, or especially with it. Most of it happens within a career field, right? Most of it is not Air Force specific. Like most, even, hey, they're really great in the wing, loves this master sergeant, but they suck at their job. Well, why do they suck at their job, right? Has anybody ever told them to focus 80% at least on your shop, and your shop has to be running good before you go do anything at the wing, volunteering or whatever else? Probably not, right? Because like, I love the way you say it, Sergeant Heights, and I talked about it when I use the enlisted force distribution as an example. Tell that to that person's face. Would you tell that person's face? And if not, then why haven't you? Maybe in a more professional way, but why haven't you? Well, because like Sergeant Cook pointed out, not everybody's comfortable with that. Not a lot of people aren't comfortable with, I call them courageous conversations, because it takes courage to go and say, Sergeant Heights sit me down and say, hey, you know what, Sergeant Vaden, hey, you're not doing what you need to be doing. And here's where you're messing up. It's so hard for a lot of people, the majority of the Air Force, I think, to sit down and do that. And I'm hoping we're moving towards that through your leadership from airmen like yourself, moving towards where we have more of those courageous conversations where we're like, hey, let's talk about what you're not doing right, but how we can move past that, right, and get you in a better position. So we've talked about it a lot. In my Air Force career, I've heard that a lot. I've just have not seen it executed that much, right? So any thoughts on this before we go around the room for your closing comments and perspective? All right, nothing heard. Senior Reyes, we'll start out with you. Then Blair will go to you, Claiborne, Heights, and we'll end with you, Sergeant Cook, on your perspective. I'll switch it to go to speaker view so the people watching get a full view of you. So yeah, we'll start out that way, and then just after one person's done, just the next person jump on and provide your perspective and closing comments.
Thanks, Chief. Regardless of what situation we're in, what process we're executing, what is going on across the world, we all have to remember that we have the privilege and honor of serving in the world's most powerful Air Force. As leaders, we're charged with the mentorship, development, and leadership of our airmen, who are the future of our Air Force. So I challenge everyone to be a better leader, airman, and human being tomorrow than they were today, striving to be better each day. because at the end of the day, the future of our Air Force is what we all make it. That's all I have, Chief. Thank you.
Wow, that's a hard one to follow. Thank you for those good words, Senior Reyes. For me, I would just keep it simple. Just try to be a good person, try to be a good human being. And if everyone can do that, the Air Force will start moving in the right direction. And a lot of these, I think, minor problems would start going away because everyone would start putting the little personal feels and personal touches behind them. That's all I have.
Yeah, Senior Reyes, that's hard to follow up. I do not have a speech prepared. But no, I agree with everybody. I think it was a really good discussion. One thing I think I'd want to point out in my closing comment is that we got to give a lot of these younger people the credit that they are more emotionally intelligent. This generation is more emotionally intelligent than previous generations. It's just, I don't know if it's evolution or what, but the conversations that I've had with people coming up, just make a lot of sense. And when you try it, the Air Force does a great job of trying to Air Force things that you cannot Air Force, right? We try to fit things into molds and structures and frames that just by human nature, we can't control. And so I think we miss a lot of opportunity there by calling something, but then not having a way to develop that something. So we have a name for it. We know what we want to be, but we don't know how to change human beings in that aspect. And so we really need to leverage that emotional intelligence of our younger generation, and just, once again, like everyone else said, comes back to being that human being and having a discussion, more of a team versus, talking. I talk down to this tier, and then that tier talks down to that tier, and that tier talks down to that tier. I get that that's the military structure, but it is wholly more effective if you talk to everyone on that equal playing field, and just giving people that latitude to develop those types of connections and teams will pay dividends. I've seen it. Thanks.
I thought you said you couldn't top it. Jeez. My closing comments, again, everything that's been said, it's been a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. I've even learned a lot just hearing the different thoughts and inputs of everyone involved in the chat. Just remembering that, again, time and getting to know the individual as an individual as well as a professional pays dividends. I often challenge NCOs and airmen with the standpoint of NCOs' responsibilities are to train the replacement, and remembering in that how you treat them is who they could eventually grow to be when they take your spot. So just remembering that they will have troops of their own one day, and it's systematic. And then I talk about perception and truth, and the bridge between that is understanding. And the only way you're truly going to understand an individual is through communication, through constant interaction, being vulnerable, and having those discussions, whether difficult or not, and just being willing to be there and be fully invested in your people goes a long way. So thank you.
Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to everybody. I believe the Air Force is doing a great job moving the ball forward, but it is up to each one of us to be good leaders, to make ethical decisions, and to take the time to mentor, coach, and lead with dignity and respect. In CE, our leadership philosophy here is that we're all human beings. We all make mistakes, and we deserve to be treated like humans with that dignity and respect. We give grace and the benefit of doubt anytime someone makes a mistake, and so we tend to go lenient the first opportunity that someone makes a mistake, and we give them that benefit of the doubt. And we truly believe, and we've seen it time again, that if it is not a mistake and you're just trying to pull the wool over our eyes, we will get another opportunity to another crack at the whip, so to speak. But at the end of the day, it is up to each one of us to make those decisions to be good leaders. Thank you, Raiders, for all you do.
Awesome. I really appreciate every one of you taking the time out of your schedule. I know we say that a lot, but it does truly come from my heart, because like I told the senior CEOs, we were having a luncheon yesterday. I said, the time that you've carved out to sit here and have this discussion, give me and the boss feedback, you're missing out on something in your unit that's going to take you extra time to cover up, or I shouldn't say cover up, but go back and, take care of. So thank you. I know first sergeants, y'all are crazy busy. I know I've seen you checking phones and people coming in, chatting with you. So I know that you're behind schedule already. So I'll keep my final closing comments really, really short. But I just want to say I appreciate the Raider shirts, all of you across this basin, especially the ones that joined me here today to have this. I think it is a courageous conversation. There's some things that we all talked about that's just going to sting some people's ears when they hear it, but it's good for them, because if they really internalize it, they sit down and just pause for a second, they'll be like, you know what, that first sergeant had a good point. So I plan on sharing this. Y'all stay on after my final words. I'll hit the recording stop, and then I want you all to hang out just a second. But never forget, my final words to all the airmen across the Air Force that might have the opportunity to hear this is to never forget that, number one, like all the shirts have pointed out, we're all human beings. It takes humans to power this. We're not machines. Fabric of our nation takes a human to power it. No matter how much technology is out there, there's a lot of great stuff. Don't get me wrong. We have some fantastic equipment. But we have amazing people that power all that equipment. So never forget that. Whatever leadership role or whatever your duties or responsibilities are in the Air Force and supporting the effort to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, never forget that. But never forget that we're humans. And so every level, if you take a look at it that way, you will make the right call, because you won't be as quick to just hammer, as Sergeant Claiborne talked about, and any of the other ones, just quick to jump on the gun of the discipline train. Stop. Try to figure out the process of why this person is doing the things that they're doing or not doing the things that they should be doing. So again, hats off to every one of you first sergeants across the Air Force for all that y'all do, but especially our Raider shirts here in Raider country. Thank you so much. And thanks for being on here. Chief V, out.